think everybody's here now. So we are going to continue this workshop today with a keynote lecture by Daniel Miller, who is Professor of Anthropology at UCL, University College of London. He's the author of 37 books and is the founder of, founded the Digital Anthropology program at UCL, and he has run this big project that is called Why We Post, Anthropology of Social Media. This is a project that has lasted for 4 years and involved a team of 9 people who did research in 9 different countries all around the world, but I'm sure that he will talk more about this now. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Elizabeth, and the other people that have organised the day. Thank you very much for coming. I'm honoured to be invited here. And I think the sense of coming here to a day on social media in Turkey is that sometimes you come and give a talk on this topic and people's presumption is you're talking about something sort of trivial, relatively unimportant. For good and bad reasons, I think you come here and you can start from the premise that people are going to recognise that we're dealing with something that matters. Now, normally, a talk like this will, as an academic, involve taking some particular issue and trying to explore it in detail. I apologise, there is nothing in the next hour that is going to have in-depth reward. And that's because basically what I want to do is talk about the breadth of a project and at least touch upon as many different elements as I can in the time available. I should also say that although I am speaking, as Elizabeth mentioned, this is really a project that is about 9 people, now about 10 people, working very closely together in a way that is unusual, particularly in social science. That is to say that from the beginning, the project was conceived of as collaborative. All of us spent 15 months, very traditional kind of ethnography. Research methods, ethnography, that's what we did. And actually I should also add perhaps that essentially most of our work is offline, not online, which is in the nature of ethnography. Although obviously one of the components would be online work. So we worked collaboratively in the sense that we thought about the project collectively initially. We went to the field simultaneously, the team was a bit late, it caught up, and every month we worked on the same thing. And we distributed a considerable amount of material around us while we were working each month, discussed it, and also discussed what would be kind of the next topic for the next month. And that continued all the way through the 15 months of research. Also then when we came back, all 9 people started writing their book. We adopted the same chapter headings, with one chapter exception, and we wrote on the chapters, again, simultaneously. So it's an unusual model for social science research. And we felt we could afford to have the same chapter headings, because when you look at the books, you'll see that the content is so different that in a way makes one of the core points of this comparative research. The research took place in, when you say global, there are 9 rather specific places, and there are issues of generalisation we can discuss. But very briefly, you've got Janina Silliman working in Trinidad, you've got Nell Hayes working right here in the north of Chile. It's a site basically right in the middle of the desert, mainly there because of the adjacent copper mines. A lot of families involved in the copper mines. You've got a site here in Bahia, Juliana Spire doing the work. It's a site really occupied by things like builders, waiters, hotel cleaners. It's a squatting area sort of behind where the sort of wealthier people live. You've got myself working in some villages north of London. You've got Razvan Nicolescu working in Italy. I mean, although Elizabeth is Italian, she works in Turkey, whereas the Romanian works in Italy, because it's anthropology. Razvan working in the very, very south of Italy, Puglia. You've got Elizabeth working in Mardin. You've got Shuram, Venkatram working in the south of Chennai, South India, particular area where you've had just ordinary villages, And then some 200,000 IT workers now commute, okay, to work in the middle of all those villages. So you can contrast the experience of the villagers and the IT workers. And then China is the one place where we have two projects. Tom MacDonald at the top, working in a rural area, and quite a traditional rural area, in the sense that it's not that far from the birthplace of Confucius, and they carry those kind of values with them. The contrast is Xin Wang, who worked in a factory, lived in a factory, and it's a sort of exemplar of the fact that you've had what's said to be maybe the biggest migration we've ever had. 250 million people who migrated from rural areas into the factory system. And this is one of those sort of typical factories. So a great spread of different field sites, and obviously I'm going to talk about the differences between them. One of the things that allows you to do is also undertake a certain amount of survey, more quantitative work. We certainly did some, and in the book I'll be talking about, chapter 4 develops the materials that we get from those kind of comparisons. But to be honest, maybe it's the prejudice of a lot of anthropology, we mainly did this to demonstrate that actually in the different field sites the questions meant very different things, and actually these kinds of tables therefore in some ways don't actually mean very much. But we did do it in a sense almost to make the kind of negative point. Now what I'm going to do start with is talk about some of the general conceptual, like theoretical issues that arise from the project, and then go through some of the topics that these relate to. And I'll talk about three of these kind of underlying components. The first is a concept we call polymedia. And it relates a bit to the discussion we just had before about digital divide, and the way in which you're now getting a proliferation of different materials and devices, but they also are becoming much more available, and as was pointed out, the digital divide is now less one of access than issues of culture, as the point made. But because it's less one of access, that, we argue, has a wider consequence. What we argue is that polymedia is not just a theory that says you have to relate each of these media to all the others in order to comprehend any one of them, but it is also, in some sense, a re-socializing and a re-moralizing of our relationship to media. Now, what I mean by that is that when, essentially, the reason in a lot of these countries people used any particular media was because they could afford it, or they had access to it, then that explains the one they use. But when you have a situation with phone plans and with internet access plans, where the difference between the platform or media used is not so much one of cost and access, then what the consequence is that when somebody chooses to use some particular media, they're judged on it. It's like, when I say re-socialized and re-moralized, what it means is you're asking, why did they use that particular media? One of the inspirations was Ilana Gershen's book on how males and females dump each other from relationships. And she was like, it's not just that you dump me, but like we did it on WhatsApp, couldn't even use phone, couldn't even use done it to my face, etc., etc. So these become areas of morality and judgment and sociality in ways that possibly was not the case before that. So in the course of a relationship, you may move from one media to another depending on the implications of each individual media. Now, when you're doing a project this scale on social media, one of the responsibilities, you would think, would be to say, what is social media? So we took it upon ourselves to try and come up with some kind of definition of what this stuff actually is. And effectively, the term that we use is scalable sociality, and it comes like this. If you look at the situation prior to social media, in general, you've got two kinds of main sources of media. On the one hand, you've got public broadcasting media. You put something out there, radio, television, or newspaper, and it goes out to whoever gets it, right? Or you tend to have conversational, dyadic, tend to be one-to-one, things like telegram, telephone, etc., etc. Generally speaking. then with things like email, etc., that dualism starts to kind of break down. And if you look at the history of social media, the first platforms that we recognise as social media coming down through MySpace or Cyworld in Korea, which was probably the first really established social media platform, etc., and QQ, China. In some ways, these are coming down from public broadcast. Instead of broadcasting to anybody, you might be broadcasting to, say, a couple of hundred friends, or whatever it might be. More recently, you see the development of platforms such as WeChat or WhatsApp, and these, if you like, are sort of coming upwards from things like texting and voice communication, and might go to a dozen or 20 people. Now, if you put those things together, what you see is that instead of that original dualism of media, you're now having new varieties of platforms that effectively are colonising what you might think of as the group space between these two. And as you get more, the colonisation, as it were, gradually fills in some of the places and the possibilities that existed, which were always there in our ordinary kind of communication, but weren't necessarily there through technological media. The result of that is you get scalability. And it may be scales with regard to things like the size of the group you want, or it may be things like the degree of privacy that you want. And you can start to think about these different platforms, not just in terms of polymedia, but also in terms of where they lie with respect to those different scales. So, for example, part of my work was in 4 secondary schools in the villages where I was working in the UK. And if you look at them in general, most of these 11 to 18-year-olds are using around about 5 different social media platforms. And looked at in a bit more detail, you find that the sort of smallest group is actually, again, it relates to a paper we already heard about, Snapchat. Because Snapchat is above all, I would argue, for these kids, it's about creating trust. It's about creating small groups. Why do you send the ugliest photo you can send? By the way, the technology, if you take the camera here and you stick it up your nose, that's about as ugly as you can be. So why would you send the ugliest picture possible to your friends? Well, it's to say, okay, I'm sending you this because you then won't send such an ugly photo of me to the others, and I'm trusting you kind of not to do that. You might do it if it's a kind of joke and we agree it's a joke, but don't do it if I kind of, wouldn't like it. So effectively, you're creating, say, a dozen friends who are actually bonding around these kind of ugly photos together. Then you go up from that to something like Facebook, and Facebook, to Twitter. Now, Twitter amongst these school kids is used as a class group. I'm getting my things out of order. Sorry, you go from Snapchat to WhatsApp. WhatsApp groups, bigger than Snapchat groups, but not usually the whole class. For example, typically you'll get a girls' WhatsApp group where they can talk about the boys, and a WhatsApp group includes girls and boys together. Then you move out to Twitter. Twitter tends to be the whole class, and that's where a lot of kind of banter, well, actually not very nice stuff, goes on. Or Twitter beef is going off between these kind of kids as they use Twitter as a kind of class group. Then you move up from there, you get to something like Facebook, and Facebook, as has already again been mentioned this morning, is not anymore simply this kind of peer group thing. It actually adds in now family, neighbours if you're starting to work, it might be the people that you work with, so it's a larger form of sociality. And then at the top, in some ways, you might say you get Instagram. I put it at the top because one of the qualities of Instagram for these people is that it's the one place where you actually like to have strangers. The others you don't. And the reason for that is Instagram, you spend a bit of time, you've got some really nice photo image that you kind of curated, and it's the best of a couple of meetings, stick it up there. And if somebody from Estonia comes on and says, oh wow, that was a really nice photo, it's like, somebody from Estonia liked my photo on Instagram. That's kind of good. Right? So if you think about it as a whole, what you've got is scale. You've got them configuring all these different units into a kind of group. If that was the illustration that went with that, but never mind. The third, I think, key point in the sort of premise underneath a lot of what we do is the focus on content migration. And the reason this is important is because of the way people tend to explain the activities that they see on social media. Because particularly in areas of media communication studies, and many of you are very well aware of this, we tend, not surprisingly, when we see these forms, to want to explain what we see in terms of something that is grounded. That is to say, it's because the Facebook Corporation planned it thus, or indeed it's a quality of Twitter in its brevity. And there's a language, which the key term is called affordances, which intend to imply that because of a propensity in that particular form, that it helps explain why people use it in the way they do. And that, by and large, dominates the way we've tended to explain what's going on in an awful lot of social media. But what we actually find in all of our work is that the core to usage is content, and content tends to work in various genres, which actually many of which come prior to the development of social media. And then if you look at these genres, you find that they actually migrate kind of quite happily from platform to platform to platform. So a genre that existed prior to social media would be these same school children and all this kind of banter that is going on around the class, etc. And that really developed initially in many places through something called BBM, which was the national service of BlackBerry phones, because the BlackBerry phones were cheap, young people could afford them. Then it goes elsewhere. In Trinidad, it tends to go to Facebook. In England now, it's essentially in Twitter. But these are totally different things. I mean, Twitter is not the same as Facebook. So how come exactly the same genre works in these different platforms in the same way? Or you'll get a genre that does develop in relation to new social media, something like, say, memes. And you start them in some place like Brazil, they start off in a site like Orkut, and then they move on to Facebook, and then they move on to WhatsApp. So the issue then becomes that if you look more carefully, you see that actually we assume we know what these platforms are because of typicality of usage. So we might have thought, okay, Facebook is great for socialising and all these little sort of stories about what we're doing, and Twitter is really about sort of getting information, okay? And that's what they are. Then you look at these young people, when working with them, you find it's exactly the opposite. That actually, because of Facebook is now seen by parents, etc., that's really information sharing. All the intimate sort of personal stuff is going on around Twitter, right? Opposite of the others. And another kind of underlying example of that would be, it's not just a difference in usage at one time. As I said before, these have history, and quite surprising histories in many cases. So if you take something like email. Now, email's been really important in my life. And for me, one of the things I thought was significant about it in terms of the whole history of political economy and capitalism, etc., was that it seemed to be the end point of a trajectory in which an attempt by commerce to close down the barriers between work and non-work was finally being broken down. That actually you could arrange when the kids were being picked up and all the other issues within a workplace, and you couldn't really be stopped. Because increasingly, people like myself probably do more personal stuff in the office and more work stuff at home, and vice versa, I guess. And that's thanks to email. So that's what email is. Well, then you look at this new generation. What do they use email for? They actually never use email for anything personal at all. They use email specifically to bracket off formal, commercial, or other kinds of work-related activity. So they use this media to erect exactly the barrier that I thought email's affordance, whatever it is, was used to break down. Now, the point of all that is, A, we need to think again about the logic, the causative logics that we're bringing to bear in the explanation of what we see going on in these media, and we need then to bring something else to the table to explain what it is that we're actually seeing that's going on. So these are three of the principles, and may get to another one called theory of attainment later on. But point of media, scalable sociality, content migration are critical to the way we try and understand this various material. And it's because of that that we actually didn't title our main comparative book, How Social Media Changed the World. We titled it, How the World Changed Social Media. To put it again in slightly more abstract ways, I argued a long time ago that for anthropology, there's basically two forms of cultural diversity that we're interested in. Predominantly, we've always been interested in something you might call a priori diversity. Diversity that comes from cultural difference, that comes to us from history, and is the given in the different societies that we study. But there's another possibility, which you could call a posteriori diversity, which is basically when something gets developed, and then in the course of its dissemination around the world, it becomes differentiated. And that can be a form of education, a principle of human rights, or indeed a new technology. And that form of diversification and how the a priori relates to the a posteriori is again something that we're certainly interested in. Now, having said that, underneath that is, of course, this study of cultural difference and diversity. And so one of the things that we obviously want to establish is the particularity of our given field sites. And typically in anthropology, what we do is find somewhere really kind of weird and exotic, where we do things in ways we've never anticipated, and make the anthropological point that way. So I want to do that, and I'm going to do it with regard to a particularly weird community, as far as I can tell, in terms of their usage, and they're called the English. Because I spent my own work in these villages in England trying to understand how social media had developed in their usage in this particular community. And to cut a very long story short, what this book argues is that in order to do that, you have to understand the underlying principles of sociality, as you would for any region. You're going to look at what social media does for sociality and say, what is actually sociality for this particular society? And in general, you would argue that for this English community, it does not have minorities. It's a very homogeneous particular place, unusually in these days. There is a real bifurcation between the private and the public. So these villagers would say, we're a very friendly village, okay? Unlike people in some metropolitan areas. We're very friendly. What they mean by that is that you go on the street, go shopping, they talk to people. They expect to say something to the shopkeeper, to other people, their neighbours, etc. So there's a sociality in the public that is indeed friendly. But what they do not do is have people cross over into the private domain. You do not go into each other's homes. The kids, when they're very young, do, but they soon get trained not to. And there is an extraordinary degree of protection of the private and a very strong sensibility of what is intrusive. Okay, that you should respect. And that, one of the other studies I've been doing is of, doing 2 years, I spent one day a week working with people with terminal illness, mainly cancer, for a hospice, because I was also doing some practical work. And again, how can they have this much isolation and loneliness for people with terminal illness? You explain it when you see how sociality does not, once they have to be restricted to the home, how sociality does not come into that domain. Okay, so then you've got an interesting situation, because the story of the book is what happens when you have a society where sociality is basically about keeping apart the public and the private, and you have social media that are just defined as something that bridges in a new way the very distance between the public and the private. What happens when these two come together? And the argument in this book is that you can see a particular trajectory of what happens, particularly now I'm going to adult usage rather than teenage usage. When the adults first come into this, they think, I ought to use it to get back in touch and widen my social sphere. There is what you might call a myth of community, that once upon a time we lived in more community-minded relationships. It is a myth, and I can talk about that happily. But there's a belief that that was the case, and now we've all become more isolated individuals, etc. Actually, this isolation went on in the 17th century, 18th century. Now, so you've you've got that situation where they say, okay, now we can reverse that and get back into something more like communities. They use Friends Reunited, they use Facebook, and they, all the people I went to school with. Oh, that cousin I haven't seen for ages who now lives abroad, whatever it is. They bring them all in, and then after a short time, they regret it. Because actually, there were reasons why they did not stay in touch with these people they were at school with. There were reasons why they were actually quite pleased that the second cousin went and migrated elsewhere. And what you end up with is, I started the study thinking that social media is what you use to friend people, to bring them in. I realised that the main use by adult English people is actually to keep people at a distance. But what they do, I call it the Goldilocks study, I don't know if you necessarily know the tale, that a lot of the time they say, oh, well, it's okay, there's this person I went on holiday with, did stuff I shouldn't have done, doesn't matter, but, I don't want to completely dump them. But they're on Facebook, or there's this relative or whoever it is, they're on Facebook, which is fine, I'm not defriending them, I'm perfectly friendly. But it kind of means I don't actually have to invite them round, I don't have to talk to them, I know what's going on in their life, it's enough. So you've got them at this distance. It's neither sort of too cold, but it's neither too warm. It's like our weather, tepid, in the middle, grey. And the word that is most commonly used, if you're English, you'll recognise this, for describing this is nice. It's how relationships are kept nice. And this comes up just again and again. Now, I'm not saying that does not exist. I'm sure people in Turkey do the same thing to some degree. But when we compare our different sites, the degree to which this kind of characterises the English site as opposed to the others is quite striking, and therefore constitutes a particular Englishness which makes sense in terms of understanding the relationship between sociality as it previously existed and sociality as it exists through the content of these various social media. Having said that, there are also many generalities that one wants to make about social media and its consequences. And a lot of our concern is how do you kind of weigh these two things up? So one of the generalities, and a lot of these are talked about in our e-learning course, which I'll mention at the end, but one of them is to say that, social media has been a transformation in human communication. Why? Because it has made visual images much more part of ordinary communicative action in a way that was previously dominated either by textual forms or oral forms such as voice. So, as in the Snapchat case that was described earlier, you really can actually chat through snaps or convey through Instagram or memes or photo images, etc., etc. And for example, we have a number of areas where we work where there's a high degree of literacy, such as in the South Indian case. So for a society that's groups of illiterate, that possibility of communication safely through visual forms is particularly important. For others, it's more a kind of balance between that and the other kinds of things that are going on. So you can then see again how it feeds on previous developments in these forms of communication. So one of the things I would say about things like Snapchat is that you can see that this emphasis, at least in this initial phase, of using the face is actually almost, it's like kind of taking the emoji that becomes the emoji that becomes the greater flexibility that you have when you actually use your face to express something that is happening in your life, or how you feel, or your mood, or whatever it is. And in that sense, it makes sense when seen in terms of these continuities of communications. It's not, however, the same as saying this simple self-expression. And one of the things I always never quite work out about Facebook is everyone say, oh, Facebook is this visual self-expression by people. But actually, when you look at people looking at images on Facebook, right? There are two kinds of images you can find on Facebook. There's the ones that you post yourself, and there's tagged images that somebody else put on of you, right? And which photos do you think most people tend to look at in most places that one's working? And not surprisingly, the tag photos, right? And why? Because this is an example, and I'm going through it very fast, of my images that are not tagged, and these are the ones that are tagged. Go through that. So it's almost like, look, this isn't getting dressed and showing yourself. This is like somebody else dressed you in the morning to go out. And that's not quite the same thing. And there's many different ways in which this, this kind of wider sociality operates. And one of the things that I've been looking at is the way in which these images are used for kind of banter-like components, particularly around, like I mentioned before, the school kid use of Twitter, but I think I'm going to pass through that quite quickly. All I'd say is you get an evolution from the Facebook use of these tags and these others. Then you get into things like the Twitter use, which is often, for these people, a sort of banter use, and then you get into the kind of Instagram, where the photograph becomes much more to the fore as the thing that you're crafting. And I think, there's so much that can be said about these things. One of them is that I think that, again, people say, oh, you're just screen photos. When actually I found all these people using Instagram, they spent 2 weeks going around looking for some wonderful image that is good enough to be crafted for Instagram. It actually frames, I would argue these things frame the way you look at the outside world. So a lot of these kids, they're trying to say, oh, what would be a good image for Instagram? Or what would be a very clever thing to say on Twitter? And they become sort of projects in which they try to develop in order to populate what's going on online. So again, thinking in Bourdieu terms, that's your normal use of Instagram to show something that's kind of pretty, and this is the ones with sort of higher, if you like, cultural capital, who can say, oh, I managed a picture of sunburn and make it look pretty, or make it look pretty interesting, I think is more to the point. Okay, one of the things we've obviously tried to do is to challenge a lot of the rather simple discourses you get around these different visual images. I can't stand talking about selfies because every journalist asks you about it ad nauseam, but the point is that there is a great variety of them. And one of the cases I use to show that these things actually can matter in a different way is Matt Marshall was one of my informants in the hospice work. He died of cancer, as did most of my informants. But when we could talk about it, he was explaining to me, firstly, largely the use of Facebook. And one of the things he kept saying was that the point about it is that when I am using Facebook, on the one hand, I'm explaining to other people in an effective way the progress of my disease, what's going on to me. But in so doing, I am also acknowledging to myself, in a slightly more profound way, what actually is happening to me. So I felt that this was actually his cover photo at one point. And it was when he'd come out of chemotherapy, and he'd reached a point where he felt, I can now show myself to the world. That's sufficiently filled out again. It was very difficult chemotherapy. But he'd recovered it enough, and he felt, now I can do this. And he uses a mirror selfie to do that. And shades of Velasquez and Las Medinas and things, you can see how, in a way, you've got this kind of double visuality, where he's explaining this process, rather than saying it to me. The mirror selfie effectively explains the process of the simultaneity of showing something to the outer world and also showing it to yourself. And the point being is that selfies are just potentially as profound as any other visual image that we might use. Okay, the other major visual image that we're concerned with, because it comes up a lot in relation to social media, is what the hell are these memes? Why memes? Why these vast numbers of other kinds of images going on there? And again, I keep saying to cut a long story short. The good news, I'll come to it at the end, is there is much more detailed account of everything I'm saying, and it's all available in Turkish. Everything we're doing in public themselves is being published in Turkish. So you can read it at leisure. Or reading it. So what we basically argue about memes is the phrase we use is we think memes are what we call the moral police of the internet. And that is equally true whether you're talking about the serious kind of meme, in this case, sending out a meme, sometimes getting up at 6:30 in the morning. Because in Hinduism, you want to start the day with this sort of good deed, as it were, and spread it out there. And now using social media to do it, but equally all the kind of funny ones. The next one's a funny one, yes. That actually, in places like England, etc., there's much more emphasis on essentially funny memes and comic genres. And what, however, you see in common to these is that they are both, in different ways, forms that tend to create normativity around moral issues that people are concerned with. Either by, let's say, making fun of the politician that's done something wrong, or making fun of somebody who's done something that they think is not quite appropriate, or by actually showing one's evangelical Protestantism, or whatever it is that one's trying to explore in a serious way. Both establish a certain moral normativity around what we're trying to say. And again, it goes back to what I was saying a bit earlier about illiteracy. What you find in many of our field sites is that it's people who are not necessarily very confident, people who wouldn't easily express opinions on, be it politics, or be it religion, or be it something else, in a text, but find sharing a meme that they have found that expresses the sentiment that they are actually themselves identify with is a very effective way of actually broadcasting their association with that particular set of values. So memes, again, very important new component of what's going on, although used, at least in anthropological sense, for a very traditional purpose, the construction of normativity. Having said that, you also have to deal with the degree to which, having made generalizations about the visual, in every case, you're also then going back to the level of field sites and looking at the specificity of each individual field site. So to make, again, a generalization, but this time about the contrast between field sites. Actually, there's 11 books that are coming out of this project. 9 of them are monographs about the individual field sites. One is the comparative book, How the World Changed Social Media, I showed you earlier. One other book is simply on the visual content, and it's a systematic comparison of what we found in Trinidad postings on Facebook and English postings on Facebook. And the kind of things you might say is that Trinidadians seem to care a great deal about what they look like when they put themselves out online, and English people kind of don't. And there is a significant difference. But equally, you could say that, okay, even if you care about what you look like online, that isn't sufficient in terms of kind of looking through these generalities, because you would say, okay, the Trinidadians, not only do they care what they look like online, but they're concerned to show individual creativity, that they have put together an assemblage of look that is kind of to them. Whereas when we look at our Italian field site, in the people in South Italy, they are very concerned that they look stylish, like really stylish, when they post online. But the stylishness is a conformist Italian notion of what is good style. So they would ask their hairdresser, how should I look before I post it? Whereas the Trini would expect to do something that's different to other people. So there's always, depending on what level you look at, you're going to find these kind of nuances and differences throughout. Okay, to sort of go on from, I suppose, 2 of the major topics that people tend to deal with in social media. One is kind of the visual and the other is the political. And actually, we think the 2 have a lot to do with each other, because it's the emphasis on the visual that certainly seems to explain a lot of what we find in the political realm. Now, one of the points about the way that we study politics is this. There is a plethora of studies of how people use social media for political purposes. And I do not want to detract from those studies. They obviously contribute. But, like almost anything else with social media, because it's so ubiquitous, because there's so much of it, whatever you want to find, you're going to find it, right? Whatever topic, pretty much these days, you're interested in, you will find it on social media if you look for it. The purpose of our style of field work is to say, the people in this project, we sit for 15 months with a community of people. Essentially people we define as ordinary for some reason or And we sit with those people for 15 months. And then we ask ourselves, okay, forget somebody, we're not interested in activists or nightlists, just in terms of this particular segment of the community. To what extent do political postings, or postings with political reflection, actually pass through their walls or their WhatsApps, or wherever it is? And I say WhatsApps actually because one of the significant things is that a lot of the other kinds of work will tend to focus on relatively publicly available forms of social media because they're publicly available. WhatsApp is hugely important today. It's a massive form of social media. But how do you know what's going on with somebody's WhatsApp? The point about this kind of ethnography is it's about sustained long-term relationships. Because we want to be studying WhatsApp to the degree that WhatsApp matters to that community, that means we have to be part of those WhatsApp groups. We have to see it to the same extent. You can't privilege the more public simply because it's easy to do. And that's the premise for us. So if you take the totality of all the stuff that's going on, what actually passes through this material? And then what you find is not necessarily what you expect. I mean, Elisabetta, when she opened the conference, said, in many respects, what she found in Mardin is not necessarily what she anticipated when we went there. So one of the things that I think her study of Mardin showed particularly well is that for some of these things like Facebook, you see quite clearly that what you see online, both with respect to politics and more generally, is not really a simple reflection of what is going on offline. Actually, in many respects, it's a much more conservative world. A lot of the changes and transformations going on in Turkish society that you would see offline are not actually present online at all. In fact, one of the things that came up again earlier was the propensity to show food rather than people on a lot of these postings. And the reason for that is, she's working in an area where people feel the need to be circumspect. And they're worried about surveillance. Yes, they're certainly worried about state surveillance. So if, let's say, in the Kurdish community, you're going to be very concerned what you put on, and you might have a lot less politics out there than might otherwise have been the case. But actually, mostly, you're concerned with surveillance by your family. Because essentially, these are social worlds. They're about the everyday communication going on between yourself and people you know. And when I say family, that also relates, of course, to the politics. Because the reason it's relevant is it's not just that you don't post something that shows you have a girlfriend. You also are careful about politics because, other things being equal, politics is a divisive area. Other things being equal. It's one of those areas where you get heated disagreements also within families, as well as between. And if social media is about people keeping their relationships one to another, and often in a relatively good way, you may want to avoid postings that are relatively speaking divisive, simply because they're divisive, because you don't want somebody responding unfriendly. I couldn't agree less with what you just said. So there's all sorts of factors, but that's true in Mardin, but in many of our sites, we would say that the primary explanation of what passes through social media in terms of politics is social. The primary factors are to do with how, in that particular society, family systems operate, friendship systems operate. If you understand them, you then understand what's going on in relation to political postings. If you don't go into that, you're not going to make sense of it. So, but it's not that surprising when you think of the nature of these particular forms. Okay, so I don't want to say that these have just one kind of directional impact, because at the same time, again, going back to the Mardin work, you can see why certain areas are particularly conservative and conformist. The thing that is said when we just opened the conference was actually that the most, when it comes to gender relations, particularly gender relations amongst young, this is radical transformation. This has engineered the possibility of contact, sustained contact between people that simply could not have existed in many kind of traditional families prior to the the relatively private spheres of things like WhatsApp and texting, etc. So, as in pretty much anything you can say about social media, when people say, what does social media do? The answer is almost always both simultaneously. So the answer to almost any question. There will be contradictory things going on, and they will be going on at the same time. But the other key point, I think, about working with a global perspective is that it also is important for anthropology, at least, to confront the degree of dominance in the discourses around social media that come from the more, if you like, metropolitan or privileged areas. So, an example of that would be a term like privacy. Because when I work in England, I would say the single thing people are most obsessed by in talking about social media is seen as the threat to privacy, and that is true in many, many areas. This is seen as something really kind of problematic in relation to who now knows what about you. But then you go to a completely different part of the world, and for example, these factory workers. And these factory workers, they come from a rural tradition in extended families, as does most of East Asia, as does most of South Asia, therefore as does half the population of the world. And there, in those conditions, there wasn't really, I mean, people do not knock before they come in. People expect to hear what is going on. There is very little occasion for something that we would normally call privacy. And actually, in many respects, the development of having your own smartphone, where you engage in these kind of, well, in this case, WeChat kind of discussions, one-to-one, many ways, as here, it's kind of the first experience of the, she'd seen on TV this thing called privacy, thought, that sounds cool, and then suddenly she kind of gets an experience of it through her use of social media. So, again and again, what we're trying to do is to break apart the extent to which, particularly if you like slightly more science-inflected discussions of social media, make generalisations without reflecting on the degree to which underlying those generalisations are discourses that pertain to particular societies. And not necessarily in the same way to others. And that would be true of many of the different areas that we engage in. Take a field like, say, education. Again, it's a case of where you have relatively good access to relatively good education, the discourse is all about social media as a distraction from education. But where, like in our Brazilian side, the education is complete rubbish, and actually you don't get much access to the resources that you would want to have from education, then through a combination of sharing mainly of YouTube videos around through social media, there's, in many respects, you could say social media is education. It's one of the main resources that people actually learn from today. So again, it's not a generalisation about education. It's always like, who actually are you talking about at that time? Talk about work, life and home, I think I'll leave that one. Okay, let me just, the last of the actual content examples. Because it came up a bit this morning, people were talking about class and inequality and those kinds of areas. And always we generalise and then we nuance, right? The generalisation we make is this. We think that you do need to recognise that when smartphones, cheap Chinese smartphones become readily available, and the high proportion of the population have access to those, that is clearly an increase of some kind of capacity. That is clearly a form of equalisation, if you like, in terms of capacity. So digital divide arguments do need to be said to grow up and be thought. But one of the things that came up again and again in our work, because we were interested in whether that degree of equalisation has an impact on any other forms of inequality offline. And by and large, our answer is always, never always, our answer is often no. What we find is that, again, that was in the situation, yes, they have equal access to these smartphones, but if you look at whether, you look at the concern, or say by employers in India, to make sure that WhatsApp automatically brings out all your contacts into the same space, so you need to actually somehow find a way of deleting how do you delete your phone from your drive or your servers? and not actually, and yet still be able to use that for other kinds of purposes. You don't want them to on WhatsApp. So there are all sorts of strategies for retaining and redeveloping forms of inequality, even without denying the transformative effects of these new forms of communication in themselves. Okay, so, gosh, I've almost run out of time. So, very briefly, I just want to end one last thing. As you can see, there are many things that can be said about this material. It's extensive. And in the same way that we saw it as a global project in terms of research, we also see it as a global project in terms of new forms of research dissemination. Because if you're going to learn all this about media, hopefully you're going to learn some lessons on how you should use media for things like educational purposes. And what we have done is to create a kind of structure of research dissemination, in which one of the things we want to do is, this is a topic that everybody's interested in. And to just create academic constructions that are pretty unreadable to outside audiences and that are based on other academics would be a pity when you have this kind of material. And yet, at the same time, you don't want to simply kind of simplify to a crass degree. So what we have done is we've created a structure of dissemination in which the horizontal comparison across these different sites is mapped by a kind of vertical structure. If you recognise at the bottom, we publish journal articles, and those articles are tedious discussions with other academics and our material in tediously academic ways, because we actually are fascinated by that material and we want to continue doing it. Fair enough. We don't change what's going on in the journals. The books, however, are written, although they're rich in ethnographic content, we recognise that people want to read them and not just academics. So everybody wrote their book full of stories and relatively accessible information, and all the academic discussion is in endnotes. A bit more like the way historical work is usually constructed. It's much more sense of narrative, accessibility, and the kind of academic background is either in journals or it's in the endnotes there. But it's there if you want it. And in any case, with those books, you've got 2,000 pages of ethnographic description. So it's not like there isn't some kind of scholarship you can then go down to. Having got the security of that, we then think we can afford, as it were, to go up a level. The next level up is the construction of a MOOC, an e-learning course. And one of the things that we learn from is the way young people tend to use these short 5-minute bits to actually learn from, and that is actually the main component in the construction of these courses. So that you're trying to adapt your teaching forms to that kind of audience, that kind of way of learning. And then above that, you come to the website, which is the most accessible form. And we did things that would make most anthropologists blush. Like we announced 15 discoveries as our findings. And some of our findings are summarised as cat memes. Right? So we do not flinch from using the same forms that are actually developed around social media in the way that we actually promote our own material. Because the argument is, if you can share a cat meme about social inequality, or are we becoming more individualistic, or there's a proliferation of different kinds of self-care, whatever it is, then you might get people interested in looking at the website material, because 100 films, and lots of other kinds of information. They might then go from that to something like an e-learning course, and they might then go from that to books, and then maybe even more to take courses and we can go on to it. So you have a structure, but the final point of that structure is the commitment to global. Because if it was just in English, it would still be inaccessible to most people. So we've translated the entirety of the e-learning course and the website, that includes something like 130 fields, into the languages of all our field sites, which is why all of this is available in Turkish. The e-learning course is already available and working, so if you have students or others who want to see this stuff in Turkish, they certainly can. The website Turkish version isn't quite complete, but certainly in a month it will be complete. And there's a huge amount of material that is available on this project therefore in Turkish and will be accessible, and everything is free. Everything is open access, everything is Creative Commons. We don't ask for intellectual property rights or anything. You can take any of this, you can dip some of it, use some of it, do what the hell you like with it in order to make it fit within your own teaching program. And I think I've run out of time. So okay.
the microphone working? Thank you very much, Andy, for this very interesting and fascinating lectures. And I think we have 10 minutes, 15 minutes for questions. It's not too a long time, but it's enough, I think. So, please.
Hello, thank you for this really entertaining and fruitful presentation. I was wondering, so all the researchers in these different countries, do they belong to a different, at least, town of that country? Like they weren't locals, right? The person, the people who were analyzing the society. Was this on purpose, or?
No, essentially, as traditionally anthropology, you try not to have somebody study their own community, and the argument in anthropology, so they're different from other disciplines, is that the problem with studying your own community is you take too much for granted. It's just obvious what you do. If you come from somewhere else, then everything you see being done is weird, and therefore needs explaining. So we've always preferred, which is why even though I have there's an Italian person on the team, she did not work in Italy. She worked in Turkey, whereas we did have a study in Italy, but that was by Romanians. So we deliberately try, not necessarily PhD students, but certainly by the time we get to postdoc, we would try and ensure that people did not study their own community. Having said that, like in my case, when I've done a lot of other work, I then will feel comfortable studying my own community.
And my second question relates to that, that would still have some sort of maybe a bias as well, right? Because that person being Italian, let's say, or being British, and being in that social context is also another layer.
Yeah, I don't think we have a concept of entirely objective research that is outside of the field of bias. So I don't think we even conceive that is a possibility in some kind of ultimate sense. Differentiates from the kind of natural sciences. But what we do try and do is acknowledge and take into account the forms that they take. But there are many elements of that. So you could say that somebody has a particular position by virtue of being female. So one of the things, generally speaking, is that most of the people, whatever gender they were, they tended to try and take a research assistant from the other gender. So males tend to take female research assistants, females tend to take male research assistants. We used this initial survey work we did. One of the reasons we do it is not really to use numeric quantitative forms, but we use it to try and establish a framework which reflects the social differentiation of the community we're with. So we have a kind of thing where you start with this number of people who are in this kind of lowest income quartile, and then this income, and then this. So the rough sense of trying to span the diversity of the community. But there are huge numbers of what you might call biases and positions, etc. The only thing I will say, though, is, I do believe in forms in attempts to achieve objectivity. It's not achievable, but I do attempt, but you have to try, as it were, and get there, otherwise what form of scholarship is this? And one of the chapters in the book explains how one of the things we're comfortable with is that every one of these projects failed, completely failed, in the sense that whatever it was that the person set out to do, and they always did have, not just a bias, but a kind of, we'd call it a hypothesis, certainly an interest. So Nell Hayes, for example, went there partly with funding to do a group concerned with indigeneity, because he went to a site in Orchard that has a high proportion of people from indigenous Indian kind of backgrounds. And what she found on social media is this is completely suppressed. It's not present at all in her social media patterns. And not only that, but actually, unlike some societies where social media is all about showing aspiration and showing who you want to be, in this particular community, they completely suppress any attempt to show difference. It's all about showing equality and showing that everybody's the same as everybody else. And if somebody shows something that is like a fancy food, they will be like that, right? So the suppression of this indigeneity comes into the suppression of forms of identity. So you want to study identity, it's an interesting result, but not what we expect. Similarly, Sriram went to study the differences between IT workers, highly professional, highly educated individuals, and found that actually, looking at this as a whole, they had a hell of a lot more in common in terms of things like caste and other issues of South Asian society than they had separately. And again, Shinyu went to study how these factory workers contact back to the places they came from. They don't. So, yes, you have biases, and yes, you have certainly expectations, but one of the virtues of 15 months field work carried out properly is that you're pretty much always going to be wrong.
We have time for another question. There. Please, one person.
Thanks for this interesting presentation. I would like to ask something about location and mobility. Because in my studies recently, I have researched about location awareness and public-private online-offline transition in terms of mobilities. For example, I studied a little bit John Dewey's studies.
So,
John Dewey. And there's this thing about mobility, corporeal virtual mobility. And I thought that about the social media, in the past, people only changed their physical location, and they were mobile in physical world. But now, with all this content migration, for example, they're also virtually mobile. So how can we understand all these experiences in terms of location?
I think I said early on that my answers to almost every question is both simultaneously. And this would be an example. If you think about the issues that this raises, perhaps not surprisingly, we find very contrasting situations. So you'll take a field site like Trinidad. Now, I've been working in Trinidad for a long time, and one of the things I found early on, that even at the nuclear level, that is siblings, children, parents, Trinidadians are diasporic at the nuclear level. In other words, the majority of families have family, immediate family members that we brought, very mobile, lots of kinds of movement around different kinds of countries, and by and large, they're using a lot of the social media, and particularly also Skype and webcam, etc., for the kind of repair. Similarly with, if you have villages that have become dispersed, trying to get people back to something that was more like the physicality that has been lost with respect to increasing mobility, particularly when it's a result of new forms of political economy that have forced people into forms of dispersion. But you also get the opposite. If you take these Chinese factory workers, I mentioned we thought that the media would be used to repair the relationship back to the rural area. And in fact, the conclusion of Shinyuan's book is that actually there's two migrations going on. One is the migration from rural area to the factories, to the people, but the other, to talk about your virtual mobility, is in a sense this movement from offline to online, where actually they are they're moving towards a new space which they're constructing, and it's a space about the form of modern China that they are trying to kind of reach. And the sort of conclusion of the book is if you compare the two migrations from village to factory and from offline to online, he says which one actually brings them closer to where they're trying to get. And he argues it's the mobility that goes online rather than the move to the factory that actually in some ways more satisfactorily accomplishes that kind of goal. So the answer is very specific to each kind of area rather than generality, but certainly it's an issue that is now true for everybody in different ways.